Welcome back to Health Daily. I'm your host, Dr. J. Today, we will talk about the top macronutrients and how they impact your body's functionality. But first, make sure you like, subscribe, share this video with somebody that you know that can use it, and click that bell notification so you know when these videos come out. Let's get to our topic for today, macronutrients and body functionality. So first is a definition. What are macronutrients? Macronutrients are essential nutrients that your body needs in large amounts to function optimally. So they provide energy and they support bodily functions and structures. There's three main categories of macronutrients that we'll speak about today: carbohydrates, also known as carbs, protein, and fats. So first, let's talk about the carbs. Carbs, as you know, I have carbs written in bread, but they're not only bread and pasta. This is a good picture of different type of carbs. So these are the body's primary fuel source, providing immediate energy for your muscles and central nervous system during movement and exercise. So we've talked about this before on the recommended intake. I'll make sure I link that video below, but we can break carbs down even further into two different carb sources. So we can talk first about simple carbs. So what are simple carbs? So simple carbs, they're often referred to as simple sugars, are quickly digested by the body and provide rapid source of energy. They are categorized into two types: naturally occurring and added sugars. And you know, naturally occurring would be something like fruit. They contain naturally occurring sugars along with fibers and vitamins and mineral. The body kind of knows how to deal with naturally occurring sugars, but still not in large amounts. And then added sugars. Those are the added simple carbs that we know from processed foods. So processed foods such as candy, table sugar, syrups, and soft drinks, which contain added sugars and very few nutrients and fiber. The next would be complex carbs, also known as healthy carbs. So these are made up of sugar molecules that are strung together in long, complex chains, making them harder for the body to break down compared to simple carbohydrates. So example of these would be whole grains, legumes like lentils and beans, or starchy vegetables like corn, winter squash, potatoes. Fruits aren't technically in the complex carbohydrate category, but while fruit contains simple sugars, they also contain complex carbohydrates in the form of fiber. So some examples of this would include apple, berries, bananas, where you have both the simple carb and also the fiber, which would make it more of a complex carb. And so on to the next screen here. This is what I've shown before. If you've been following along, this was based on the 2,000 calorie diet. So this is broken down into the percentage of how much we are recommended guidelines to take in. So 55% of carbs, 30% fat, and 15% protein. Let's go to the next screen and talk a little bit more about protein. So protein provide amino acids, which are essential for the building muscles, skin, blood, and important structures of the brain and nervous system. They are crucial for cellular growth, immune function, and overall repair. So the recommended intake, and let's step back to that screen before, as you can see, the recommended intake here is about 75 grams. Granted, you are going to adjust this depending on your customized dietary needs. This is general advice, so this is not direct customized medical advice. This is general information so we can all learn from and take this journey together. But let's see, so there's veggie protein sources. This last picture shows a little bit more of the animal protein sources that you can see on the left, and then you have nuts and some seeds on the right, and so those have some protein sources. But we also have veggie protein sources, things like peas and then broccoli that is not shown here on this screen, but then you have spinach on the screen, and then you have some seeds and nuts. And so there are veggie protein sources that you shouldn't discard. And we dropped a video, and I'll have a link here on the screen called "The Best Protein Sources You Probably Ignored." That's a really good video. You should take a look at it. And people are starting to take a look at that, and it's trending up. So going back to this chart here, so we went over protein, we went over carbs. Now let's go on to fats, and let's talk a little bit about fats. So fats are also a significant source of energy and are necessary for absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So fat, you don't want to completely disregard fats because fats are important for vitamin uptake. Vitamins A, D, E, and K. So these fats, they contribute to cell membrane structure, that is very important, and hormone production. The recommended intake, like we showed before, let's go back to that, is about 65 grams of fat, 30% of your total daily intake. Well, let's break fats down a little bit more into saturated and unsaturated fats, right? Because there are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. So these saturated fats, let's start talking about the unsaturated fats first. The unsaturated fats are shown here. Some of them are shown here, like avocado. These are known to improve bodily function without putting you at risk for cardiovascular disease. So these are past studies, these are historical things that people think. And then saturated fats have been associated in the past with overconsumption of saturated fats have been associated in the past with cardiovascular disease. But are saturated fats dangerous? So let me show this study here, and I'll show this screen. This is a National Library of Medicine article, PubMed article, that talks about, and as you can see, this is actually not a new article. This article was originally published back in 2015. So this says the evidence for saturated fat and for sugar related to coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease. So overall, what they found was that the dietary guidelines should likely focus on reducing intake of concentrated sugars and not necessarily saturated fats. So the article concludes that the dietary guidelines should shift focus away from reducing saturated fat intake and toward reducing the consumption of concentrated sugars, particularly fructose containing sugars. So going back to this picture here where it shows the pizza, are saturated fats dangerous? As you can see, the pizza is made up of a couple of different components, really the cheese, the meat, and then the bread. So according to this study that I just showed, and it's kind of a review type study, it suggests that the more dangerous part of the pizza is not necessarily the cheese and the meat. It's technically the processed bread because you have these concentrated sugars that are in in the bread. And so just food for thought when you're eating meals and going through your cheat meals, thinking about concentrated sugars over saturated fats, if you're thinking of reducing, say, cholesterol or saturated fat intake, because the studies don't show that they're necessarily as dangerous at moderate amounts, because you do need those fats to be able to intake vitamins, as we talked about before, and for cell membrane structure. So just food for thought there. Thank you for joining me today on this topic about top macronutrients and how they impact your body's functionality. I'm Dr. J. This is Health Daily. As always, we'll see you tomorrow.